Retro.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continuously unexpected. So uncivilized.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are kicking off Monday with the next episode of our The Clone Wars rewatch. But before we get back into that, Jay, want to go ahead and give everyone our social media contacts.
Sure thing. My pleasure as always. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we'll be talking about episode 8 from season 2 of the Clone Wars, which is called Brain Invaders. You might have been expecting some coverage of Star Wars Celebration in Japan. However, we are recording this before that even started. So we don't have any news for you right now, but we'll be getting to that very soon here at the end of the week or beginning of next week, just depending on what we decide to do with the debut of season 2 of Andor. So it's coming. We just got to figure out how we're going to work our schedule. Mm-hmm. So with all of that said, Jay, you want to go ahead and give us a summary of this episode, please?
Yeah, here we go. Now that Poggle the Lesser is in custody, the Jedi prepare to return him to Coruscant. However, they get a message from Mace Windu on Dantooine that medical supplies are needed at Cestus. Therefore, Anakin and Luminara assign their Padawans, Ahsoka and Barriss, to deliver the supplies to Kit Fisto at the Cestus Medical Station. Before their mission can get underway, a clone infected with a Geonosian mind worm gets on board and infects the other clones and eventually Barriss. This leaves Ahsoka to defend herself and attempt to prevent their medical frigate from making it to Cestus. After Anakin learns the key to defeating the worms from Poggle using questionable means, Ahsoka saves Barriss and the clones from the worms' influence before it's too late.
All right. What do you think about this one overall?
Okay, so the last one was creepy. This is creepy times 10, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, this is definitely prime material for, crazy kind of things going on here, but I mean overall it really begs the question of kind of loyalty to putting what needs to be done in front of what you don't want to have to do. I'm kind of dancing around what happens here at the end, but it's also kind of a precursor to what ends up happening in Order 66 too. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot going on in here, and there's just a lot of moral questioning, and ultimately Ahsoka has to make a really tough choice.
Yeah. So we were talking last time with the Legacy of Terror episode about, would we have shown this one to our children back in the day? And that one was creepy because a lot of it was in the dark, and you had the Geonosian zombies, and you had the threat of the worms taking over people and stuff like that. And, you had one crawling around on Luminara, and they got it before it could infect her and the like. This one, we see the infection. We see the worms climbing into people's noses and the like. And then we see the worms coming out of their mouths when they scream. And so it's a different type of creepy. And it does make the hair on your skin crawl. So you're absolutely right with the creep factor on this one. I like this one quite a bit. And it's, if the last episode was the zombies one, this is Dave Filoni calls it the body snatchers episode. And it works that way very well. And the featurette for this one on StarWars.com, he talks about the importance of completing the story on here, and that it was important for Ahsoka to wake up and to have a parent type figure there to comfort her and to let her know that everything's all right. That despite the
Mhm.
danger, there is, these stories have resolutions. And, so when these scary things happened, that's just not the end of it. And this did wrap up pretty nicely in that regard.
It did indeed. And, for Ahsoka especially, it's definitely a moment for her of her growing autonomy. She has to make this decision. Anakin's not there to help her. She has to trust her instincts, make choices that obviously could cost lives.
Mhm.
And so, for Ahsoka, she found out what it means to fight someone that you care about,
Yep.
in Barris as well. So there's a lot of thematic stuff that's going on here. To your point, she needed to have Anakin there when she woke up to basically reinforce her feelings about what she did being the right thing, and even he says at the end, I think Barris would agree that you made the right choice.
Indeed. So right off the bat in this episode, we get two Legends references. And the first is this report that Mace Windu was on Dantooine. And the
Mhm.
second is that Kit Fisto needs medical supplies at Cestus. And the Mace Windu on Dantooine was a reference from the Clone Wars micro series that Genndy Tartakovsky wrote and directed. And then the Kit Fisto on Cestus was a nod to the Cestus Deception novel. The trivia guide on Star Wars.com puts a nice little warning at the bottom. It's like, you should not interpret this as being a way of grounding when those events happened in those other legend
Oh,
sources, but
yeah.
it was a respectful nod, I guess is the best way to put it, to
Mhm.
those things. But still, before I even read that, as soon as I heard Mace Windu was on Dantooine, I was like, wait a second, did he fight the big stompy thing that the
Oh.
Supers had there?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's such a great little Easter egg. I love that.
Yeah, because if you haven't seen that episode, the Separatists have this new weapon that creates earthquakes, for lack of a
Mhm.
better description. This gigantic skyscraper-sized vehicle, and he manages to destroy it. But then he goes on to fight legions of super battle droids without his lightsaber in some sort of Jedi version of kung fu. Um,
Right.
it's we talked about that episode here on the podcast once, and it's
Mhm.
so incredible.
It really is. It's definitely worth revisiting time and again.
Mhm. So Ahsoka and Barriss get the mission to take the medical supplies to Cestus, while Anakin, Obi-Wan, Luminar, and Ki-Adi-Mundi deliver Poggle to Coruscant. Then the clone by the name of Scythe gets infected, and he goes about infecting the other clones. Okay, that's the premise for this episode. There's some downtime while they're in transit to Cestus, and Ahsoka and Barriss are in the mess hall on the ship, and they kind of talk about what's going on with the war and what things would be like once the war is actually over. And they bring up this point that their life as Padawans, all they've known is the life of a warrior.
Mhm.
They haven't really had the opportunity to experience, life beyond being a youngling in the Jedi Temple, except for in the service to a master during a time of war. And, what are they going to do when there isn't one here? And it's like, you guys are like 13 talking about,
Yeah.
no 13-year-old should have to talk about what am I going to do after the war on this. What did you think about that
Right.
conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're being very philosophical in that moment. Absolutely. I know, and it really does put it into perspective, as you said, just thinking, okay, yeah, these are very, very young kids, and how are they even able to have like almost that foresight? But then I also think about things like Skeleton Crew and that they were going through not war necessarily, but they were going through something that was really testing them in terms of how much could they take in their loyalty to each other and in their worldview of the galaxy and how they were able to defend themselves against certain things. And it's really, this is all they've ever known up until this point. Speaking of Ahsoka and Barriss again. And so this has been their only identity. So yeah, it is very deep for them to talk about this militarianism and almost blind obedience in a lot of ways too for them. They don't really realize it that they're going through that, but in a way they're a lot more grounded than you give them, I guess we give them credit for.
Right. And then the issue of kind of like how Anakin would cope in a time of peace comes up.
Mhm.
And in a way, Anakin never knows peace after the Clone Wars because he's Darth Vader, he's trapped in a cybernetic body. But there's this notion that he may not be able to cope with that because he's like the epitome of a Jedi warrior, which I thought was very insightful for these two Padawans.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Mhm. And then, of course, their discussion gets broken up when they get attacked by clones. And you kind of alluded to this earlier. It's kind of a foreshadowing of what life is like under Order 66. Um, but still, that was, you know, they're just minding their own business, and the clones barge in and start shooting. They turn over the table and start yelling at them to stand down, and then they have to take extreme measures against these two. What did you think about that scene?
Yeah, it was creepy in a way that it was such an abrupt about face, because all of a sudden you have this shift from being their trusted warriors to being their enemies. And then the infected clones, it's ironic because even though clones are identical replicas of each other, we always know that they have their own personalities. But now, after being infected, they speak as one.
Hmm.
They're just extensions of the worm because they're part of that hive mind. And so there's a very chilling lack of agency going on there. And it's a lot of narrative groundwork that's kind of again like that foreshadowing, as we just said, to Order 66 later on.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's like it's just like Order 66.
Uh-huh.
Palpatine issues a command, execute Order 66, and they turn on the Jedi. They get infected with the worm, they turn on the Jedi. It's
Mhm.
not, it's, it was one of the more subtle things that's not discussed about this episode very often here, but it's a clear parallel to all of this. And then, the other clones head over to the bridge, they kill the pilots. I was a little surprised they just didn't go ahead and infect the pilots, but okay, maybe they only
Yeah,
had so many worms and they were trying to use them on the Jedi. Oh no, that
good
one.
point.
But
Mhm.
I that's the best explanation I can give. We're talking about some of the creep factor for this. How about when some of the clones that were infected started talking like Geonosians?
Mhm.
What'd you make of that?
Yeah, that was the true puppeting of
Yeah.
the hive mind, quite honestly, that the pretense was dropped, and then they were able to completely be communicated with on that level of, Poggle the Lesser. It's the exact same intonation and everything. So it's almost like his voice coming through, like a ventriloquist almost.
Yeah, see, here this raised a couple questions for him because, this episode, they clearly refer to these worms as parasites and from Geonosis, and they're not like a Geonosian pupa. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
they're something different. They're a parasite. And we kind of speculated on this last week when we were talking about Legacy of Terror. That how does this work? How does this establish this hive mind type of thing where the queen can take control of dead Geonosians, or in this case, these people? And so they start clicking and carrying on like we expect through from Poggle, and look, this might just be another thing that's like Yoda. Just appreciate it for what it is. You're never going to find out all the background on it. You get
Mhm.
we're never going to get all the details of the Force either. Some of it's always going to remain a mystery, and it's fine. You don't have to have those details in order to appreciate the story. But still, it just kind of made me go, "Wow, this is bizarre what they can do with these worms in
Right.
this situation."
Yeah, it really is. And it's just again, it's not just a creepy one-off. It's a warning for the
Yeah.
entire state of the galaxy later on.
So they split up, and then Barris is going to go, I think, to the engine room and try to disable the ship so it can't make it to the medical station at Cestus because they don't want this spreading any farther than it is. And Ahsoka is going to go to the bridge also with the same goal. They're attacking the thing from two ends. But Barris walks right into a trap and she gets electrocuted and stunned. And then from there, she gets infected by a worm. But before she gets infected, one of the clones comes out and says, what does he say? Like, we know how to handle the Jedi or whatever.
Yes.
And
We
so,
were
we're just,
trained for this. Yeah.
yeah. So they were like, we were just talking about the foreshadowing of Order 66, and they just doubled down on it right here.
Mhm. They sure did. And my only thing too was maybe Barris was just too stunned by what was happening, and of course, I know it was the plot that needed to go this way, but, they stripped her of her lightsaber, but they didn't strip her of the Force. Like, she could have reached out and done something, but again, I know it was just a vehicle for allowing this to happen too.
Yeah, and she's a Padawan. I mean, she was being held, both her arms are being held and stuff like that. We know a Jedi doesn't necessarily have to make a gesture in order to a force push, but it helps, as they've described it very surface, it kind of helps if they can like get into, it's like muscle memory. If you
Sure.
do something the same way, it makes it easier to do. And so I just kind of,
Mhm.
feel like she's being held by several elite trained soldiers. That's what the clones are.
Yeah.
Without her weapon and her arms pinned, I could see why that would be difficult in that
Yeah,
situation, with that
indeed.
regard.
And then when she does end up turning and she starts, going after Ahsoka with her lightsaber and everything, I thought, again, kind of prophecy towards the future. I thought to myself, okay, just, replace that with a red lightsaber and
Yeah,
there you
yeah.
go. We got a Jedi hunter on our hands.
How far she fell from this moment.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's been concern on behalf of Anakin and the other Jedi and the other ship that's headed towards Coruscant because they've lost contact with Ahsoka's ship. And eventually, Ahsoka gets through and talks to Rex and Anakin, and explains that there's infected clones on board, and she doesn't know about Barriss yet. But at any rate, Anakin's going to try and figure out a solution to this problem by talking to Poggle the Lesser. And so he goes back to the room where Poggle's being held, and there's an interpreter droid in there. It's a translator like 3PO. It's got the markings from the Republic ship on it, which I thought was interesting. But he walks in there, and there's this notion that Geonosians can't fall for the Jedi mind trick. And the protocol droid says this to Anakin, and he's like, well, who said I was going to use a mind trick? And he just turns around and smacks Poggle across the face
Yeah.
and knocks him out of his chair against the wall, and then starts a force choke on him. So we just had the conversation earlier in this episode about what life would be like for Anakin outside of the war. And now we have him using very un-Jedi like methods in this. What was your reaction to that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, Anakin is all about saving those that he cares about. And obviously, Ahsoka is one of those people. So his choice to go this violent route is a little unsettling, obviously, at this point in time. And obviously, it's foreshadowing where he goes later with his transformation in Vader. But it is not something that necessarily totally surprised me, but the way that he talks about it afterwards, where he says, like, "I did what I had to do," or however he framed it, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he embraces these tactics without hesitation. And
Yeah,
so that
he
is
skips
definitely
right
a little
over it.
unsettling. Yeah.
Yeah, because what happens is that he gets back and he tells the other Jedi that he has to contact Ahsoka because he knows now that these parasites are affected by the cold, and that's how you have to defeat them. And it was like Ki-Adi Mundi says, like, well, how did you figure this out? And he's like, well, I got it from Poggle. It's like, well, Jedi mind they say Jedi mind tricks don't work on Poggle, on the Geonosians, and his response is that it's like, we didn't have time for me to get you guys. I had to figure this out now, and I got the information. So he doesn't even get into how he did it. He completely hides us from the other Jedi.
Mhm.
So we got two issues here. One, using a dark side force technique by choking Poggle and just resulting in torture, which is clearly, whether he's using a dark side technique or not, is not the Jedi way. That's against the Jedi code. And then he doesn't own up to what he did at all. He just skips over that part on this.
Right.
So,
Right.
look, it's secrets are not a mystery or stranger to Anakin. And, he's secretly married, to Padme, and he hasn't told anything about this. But wow. I mean, how is anyone to know? But the attachment problem is rearing its ugly head in a major way right here.
Mhm, mhm, and the fact that, like, Mundi and Luminara don't even press him, they just know he got results, and they kinda suspected how, but no one ever really holds him accountable. So, every time Anakin crosses that line and he kinda gets away with it, that next line gets easier and easier for him to cross, you know what I mean? And they're kinda seeing that they kind of suspect that darkness, but they look the other way, you know? Like, he got it done, doesn't matter how. I guess we
Yeah,
got our
yeah, and this
information, you know?
this also is coming off the heels just 2 episodes ago where, you know, Luminara and Anakin were talking about their Padawans after they got buried in the rubble of the destruction of the droid foundry. And
Right.
Luminara
Mhm.
essentially says to Anakin, it's like, "It's not that I don't care, but I'm prepared to let my Padawan go when the time comes. What about you?" And he doesn't answer that question either. This notion of attachment is not something that he really addresses head on until we get to the end of this episode. And as you were talking about earlier, Ahsoka wakes up, after she had subdued Barriss, and Barriss was pleading with her to kill her because she's been infected by this, and whether it was from suffering from the parasite invasion or not wanting to be a liability to the Republic and the Jedi, or being a threat or whatever. She's begging Ahsoka to kill her, and Ahsoka doesn't do it. She manages to win because the cold takes effect. And as you were talking about, Ahsoka is asking Anakin whether she's done the right thing. And Anakin brings up this notion that dealing with attachments is a challenge for every Jedi.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I, part of me is like, this is coming right out of the mouth of the guy who's the lousiest at it. But
Mhm.
what did you make of that?
Well, I wonder too if part of that is by saying it reinforces the need for him to follow that advice as well, or even being more of a do as I say, not as I do kind of a thing. Like Anakin wants to be a great master.
Mhm,
And you know that he wants to be a great role model for Ahsoka. And it almost makes me think of even what Yoda says, we are what they grow beyond. And
mhm.
I feel that Anakin truly wants that for Ahsoka and wants her to be the best Jedi that maybe he sees himself as, but he knows that there's holes in the Swiss cheese kind of thing for him. And so maybe by filling those holes for Ahsoka, he can make her better.
Yeah, I've got a couple of different ideas about this, which is one, it is somewhat hypocritical for him to pass on this idea that, yeah, attachment is a challenge for every Jedi, but he's doing it from a place of mentorship. Like, this is something that he's managed to figure out because, hey, look, he's a Jedi Knight right now.
Mhm.
And two, there is the similarity where, he's counseling Ahsoka on, in the end, she did the right thing because look, she solved the problem. She saved Barriss and she saved the clones, and Barriss is probably thankful that she did what she did when it's all said and done. But is that an excuse for him as well? It's he did what he had to do to get out of Poggle how to defeat the parasites. So would Ahsoka then say he did the right thing? What do you
Yeah.
think? I mean, would she approve of that
Yeah.
torture?
That's a very great question because, honestly, for Ahsoka, her choice to save Barriss actually is more in line with the Jedi Code than anything because
Mhm,
even though she was Barriss was pleading for her to kill her because she knew that she was going to be a threat. Ahsoka refused to give in to her fear. She doesn't act on anger. She protects life, even when it hurts, and she actually trusted in the Force. So, for uh, Anakin to do that behind closed doors to Poggle, I don't know if Ahsoka ever found out if that happened. And if
right.
she did, like you said, what would she think of her master? But then again, she might justify that in that she knows how Anakin is. She knows
Mhm.
that he does follow unorthodox kinds of things and that he was just doing whatever needed to be done in order to get the results that they needed to get. And so he's often gone against following the orders of the code before, and that's just Anakin.
Yeah, but the thing is that he did it in secret, and then he never fessed up to
Right.
it, as far as we know.
Mhm.
And there's a
Right.
problem with that. It is, if he's believes that the ends justify the means,
Mhm.
then why is he doing it in the dark on this?
Mhm.
Like I
Mhm.
said, he's familiar with secrets. He's violated the Jedi code by getting married, and he's got that attachment there, which causes big problems for him. We've already seen the lengths that he'll go to protect Padme, and we've seen other instances where he's gone to great lengths to protect Ahsoka in this, and he doesn't. Hmm, on the one hand, he's like, we'll see instances of him trying to train Ahsoka so that she can survive. So he's trying to teach her everything that he knows so that she can be a capable Jedi Knight. But then we get a lot of these instances where he doesn't believe that anyone can solve the problem without him, that it's
Mhm.
not going to get done without, and that's kind of the case here and this. And so there's that. I guess the other thing to take consideration in this is that would Ahsoka understand, there was the episode in season 1 when they had captured Newt Gunray, and Ahsoka and Luminara were taking him back to the Republic when Asajj Ventress attacked, and Ahsoka threatened to gut Newt Gunray with her
Right.
lightsaber in the
Yeah.
thing. Now, when she got called out on the carpet by that Luminara, Ahsoka said that, like, I wasn't actually going to do it on that,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is better than actually carrying through with the torture, but it's the threat of fear, the terror that you're invoking for that is still not an admirable Jedi quality.
Exactly. Well, I mean, we have to also remember that this is not the first time that Anakin has resorted, sorry, to violence of this kind. I mean, with regards to revenge. I mean, think about the Sand People.
Uh-huh.
In episode 2, he had no problem killing an entire village out of rage for his
Well, not at the
mother.
time, but then,
Right.
afterward, he kind of fesses up to Padme and he's broken up about it.
He does, but I mean, my point being is that he's given into that
Yeah.
several times before. So, my point being that he again, his fall was not as we know, it wasn't in a single moment. It was a thousand quiet steps at a time. And this particular interrogation of Poggle is definitely one of those steps. And the fact that he did it in secret, I still think that Luminara again, and Kiadi Moody, they kind of knew what he did, but not they overlooked it. They suspected.
Why didn't they
Don't
do
you think?
something? I don't
Exactly.
know. I mean, that's
Exactly. Why didn't they do something?
because
He got results.
is that it, or is he the chosen one? Because I think those are two different things. It's the because I don't think look, Luminara in the episode I was just talking about was not all about the ends justify the means, even
Right.
because that got results. Ahsoka
Mhm.
threatened Newt Gunray, and then he's like, okay, I'll talk, and he gave the information that they wanted in that situation, but she still he was holding Ahsoka accountable for that.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the only difference I can see is Anakin's a Jedi Knight and is the believed to be the chosen one, and so I
Yeah.
don't. I think it's more of a situation where they just move so fast. Anakin sidestepped this discussion here. It's
Mhm.
just like
Yeah.
I had to do something fast. There wasn't time to get you guys, and
Mhm.
and it's they no one saw Poggle like nursing a wound or anything. So
True.
I don't know.
True. Yeah. All good points.
Yeah, yeah. All
Wow.
right. Well, we've covered this episode, the majority of this episode. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
I just really appreciated the fact of like the ingenuity of Ahsoka in this whole thing and just her steadfastness of doing what needed to be done on her end, but doing it in a way that was merciful and still preserving her morals. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And overall, I also think that this episode is a kind of a mirror of the prophecy that is to come. As we said with Order 66 and all of the things and just how they were able to deal with this and, eventually be able to put it behind them. But I will say too that it kind of did crack me up a little bit when Ahsoka got Rex on the transmitter, and she's like, "Rex, I can't tell you how good it is to hear your voice." And it's like, that's the same voice you hear in all of the other clones, Ahsoka. But I just
Yeah,
thought that was cute. So
I
we'll
like
end
that.
it on that light note.
Good observation. All right. Okay, well then that'll do it for our discussion of Brain Invaders here on Podcast Stardust. Thank you all for joining us. I would ask that you subscribe to the show if you're interested in getting future episodes in our rewatch. But I'm going to give the caveat that we're going to be taking off for about 4 weeks from the Clone Wars because we got to get through Andor and some other content, maybe longer, because we also have got Tales of the Underworld coming up and some episodes of Light and Magic as well. We got
Yeah,
a lot of content coming up to cover. So
indeed.
we're not abandoning our rewatch of the Clone Wars. It is just going to be put on hiatus until we get through some of that other current content. But we're having too much fun. So I promise this is coming back.
Yes.
But anyways, once you've subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you go ahead and rate and review the show. That does help others find it. I've been noticing on a lot of podcatchers lately that we've been picking up some reviews and or ratings more often than not, because not all of them support reviews, and we do appreciate that. And if you want to get into the back catalog of the show beyond the 200 or so episodes that your podcatcher likely contains, make sure you head over to RutgersApp.com, where you can find all previous 875 episodes. And we've covered all kinds of stuff on this show. So go check that
Mhm.
out. Jay, you want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are and the other locations we can be found on the internet?
Yeah, for sure. So we're really easy to find. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And you can also check out all of our Pinterest pages. And we do have our 2 YouTube outlets. So we have the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. And as Dennis was saying, those do support all kinds of, interactions, and you can subscribe, and we appreciate all of that support. And another way that you can support us is on TeePublic by picking up one of our Podcast Stardust logo designs on all kinds of things from home goods to apparel and pretty much in between. So, once again, if you'd like to do that, you can hit up that link in our show notes.
All right. You remind everybody what the latest in cosplay is.
Sure. So you can always catch me on my Instagram over at j.snipscosplay. And I have a couple things in the works for our beloved month of May, the Star Wars month, as we love to call it. And one thing that I can share is that I finalized an appearance at a convention called the Sweets and Geeks Collectible Con and Pop Culture Event. And that's going to be on May 10th in North Olmsted, Ohio at Great Northern Mall. So I'll be there all day from 11 to 8 p.m. And there is also a cosplay contest that day and just a lot of really great vendors. So if anybody's in the area, you can check out all the details on my Instagram and also at sweetsandgeeks.com.
All right. So on Wednesday, we are getting into Revenge of the Sith again, and our series that's looking at the movie for its 20th anniversary. This will be part 4 of that series. We recorded that in advance, so that's why we were doing that instead of some celebration coverage or getting into Andor, which is starting tomorrow night. Can you believe that?
Oof.
But at the end of this week, we'll be getting into either Andor or the news. We haven't quite decided yet how we want to cover all that. We're going to figure it out. But those will be end of the week, beginning of next week type of episodes. So make sure you hang around for those. But with that said, thanks for listening to episode 876 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.